All right, we are back on Facebook and Twitter with our post-game show, continuing our discussion on generational activism. Our guests have been, absolutely fantastic in terms of giving what they need to give and their thoughts on activism and what we are going through and where we're going to end up. And that's what I'm all about here is where does this end up? What is the end game? So let's start with you, Philip. What's the end game here? Where, and let's say a year from now, if we're sitting here in the same place, where are we going to be as a community, as a country?
Let's start with as a country. I think that much of that depends on where we are in terms of this virus. Again, disproportionately impacting people of color. As it marches on, there seems to be an acceptance by too many in this country that fine, we want to go without masks, we want to do this and that, and basically feeling absolutely no responsibility to address this crisis. The other crisis, of course, is that of national leadership. There's a question about whether or not Donald Trump will be still president sometime next year. If he is, I would say, even as a reporter, that is particularly problematic. Because we're talking about someone who has advanced a racist agenda, who is engaged explicitly in racism, and who basically has encouraged what we're seeing on the streets right now in terms of anti-Black Lives Matter movements and militias. The implicit violence there should be of concern to everyone. As a movement, I think this movement will continue to go on because systemic and structural racism will not disappear overnight. It's something that folks will chip at, and they're chipping hard, especially young people. But I think, as the premise of this show suggests, there's also an intergenerational response to what's going on, where the mothers and grandmothers, in some cases great-grandmothers, are out on the streets along with those young people, marching and protesting against inequality, inequities. And I think that will continue in one form or another. Large demonstrations in some cases, smaller demonstrations, but demonstrations nevertheless. But at the same time that's happening, I think that there are efforts to educate people about what this country represents in terms of its legacy for Native Americans, for example, for Black folk, for in many cases poor white people, and people starting to understand their commonalities. I think that there is one of the most interesting aspects of this movement is, and I think Tony mentioned this earlier, is people again starting to connect the dots. Kelly, Denise, Tony. This is part of my hope, Chris, when I see folks like this talking on the same page, talking about what we have to do to get beyond this moment.
To me, it's almost surreal that, you could make the case that arguably the most divisive person on the planet is the leader of the free world. You could make that argument. Tony, have you kept an eye on Portland and some of the things that have been going on in Portland to, for right or wrong, to stop the activism, to stop the protesting?
Yes, no, I have. And it's a real dangerous moment. It begins to show or demonstrate what it means to have a president who acts like a dictator and who is developing fascist tactics in terms of suppressing people's constitutional right to protest and to suggest that they are thugs and other kinds of things is just absolutely ridiculous. He's an embarrassment, not just to this nation, but to this world. Earlier we were talking about DJ Hendry, but 40 years ago, I remember as a young activist that we were talking about Levi Hart, who was a 14-year-old kid who was shot in the back of the head by a 6-foot-something white police officer who said it was an accident. And I was enraged, and so was our entire community enraged about this. And I'm sure Philip remember, that case around that. But in terms of the question around where do we go from here, besides taking down the statues and removing pictures and all these, these sort of performative acts. Where do we go? The reason why we are here right now is because of what Black people did before to create the conditions for the system to open up for us. Well, now we got to open up even more. One of the things that we're doing at the University of Massachusetts is that we're organized to make UMass Boston to be an anti-racist institution, a public institution. So, and that's not just a symbolic move, but that's saying if you're going to do that, that means you have to structure the way that the institution functions, the way it works. You have to bring Black people across the board. Every time you hire someone, you need to make sure that they go through some kind of training around undoing racism so that whatever they teach, whatever field they teach, is taking that in consideration. Otherwise, you're bringing people who undo what we're trying to do when we're trying to educate people to be anti-racist. So there's a lot of systemic work. So we have all the institutions, the healthcare institution, the educational institutions, the banks, every institutions that we have to push for substantive change in which we see equity, particularly with Black workers, that they're not the least paid, particularly with Black women, that they're not marginalized, so that we have to begin to say, this is what we want. We need to have a list of, you could say demands or urgencies, but we have to put that on the table. Otherwise, we're going to go back to usual, and we can't do that. Not at this moment. We have to push the envelope and say no, and we have to stay in the street until they do it this time.
I love the work being done over at UMass Boston, and I credit most of that, the majority of, not the majority, but certainly a big piece of it to Dr. Keith Motley, who was just a fantastic chancellor during his time at UMass Boston. So, young people have to get out and vote if they want systemic change. Denise, will they get out and vote for this next election? John Lewis says it's the biggest election that we've ever had.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. We've been doing everything as far as even going door to door, taking it back. Like you said, we got to use tactics from the past and bring them to the present and figure out how can we flip them? How can they work best for us? Because we are in different times. I think just the seriousness of it is so real this time. Yes, Damien. I'm so sorry.
It's the world we live in, right? With Zooms and...
It's crazy because equality should be for everybody. That's just a fact, and it's not. And we know that. And I feel like we just really have to really disrupt people's comfort. We have to really start shaking people and being like, we're here and we're not going anywhere, and we're going to do it every single day if we have to. And our young people are willing. We are here and we are standing. A lot of people look at us as trouble, but a great man once said, you got to get in some good trouble to make a change. And that's what we want to do. That's what we are doing.
Kelly, at the beginning of the show, I talked about all the newfound Confederates. Will some of the Confederates fall off? I know, and I understand that the Black people we're a little more vested into this, but will the multicultural advantages of having just masses and masses of whites and other ethnicities involved in this fight, will that kind of peter off?
I hope not. Gosh, I hope that we keep the momentum, and I hope that my fear is sort of twofold. One, it's that Trump will be reelected. The second is that if Biden is elected, that white liberals will sort of pat themselves on the back as, see, look, he's gone, and then the work stops because we think that a Biden presidency will somehow usher in a post-racial society like we thought we would have with Obama. And we know that's just not true. And so, we have to be able to keep the momentum going far beyond the presidency, far beyond the election. This impacts so much of our lives at a local level, at an educational level, at a religious level, at a public health level, still dealing with the coronavirus. So no, it can't stop, and we cannot afford to pat ourselves on the back for small victories, or even pat ourselves on the back for, ousting Trump. It has to go beyond that, because these problems were here before Trump came into the office. And so that, I think, needs to be recognized and acknowledged.
When Obama was in office, I used to hear, from, people all the time, class warfare. I've never seen such just class warfare. And they used to blame Obama for creating a wedge between, the classes. I mean, this is times 1 million what has happened under President Trump. I mean, this is and the Trump supporters have dug in so deep, and they view everything as, a shot against them, as opposed to helping out, or doing the right thing, or helping out, a class that certainly has not been treated right, for centuries. And so it worries me.
Have always been there.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like the Confederacy or people who share those values have always been there. They just have a presidency that affirms them, that legitimizes them.
He's rallied them.
Absolutely.
He's made it chic or cool for them to come out with that.
Yes.
Which is so scary. Completely.
Yeah. And in their way, he's not just made it accessible, but for them, he's made it progressive, right? Like, these ideas are forward thinking for these racists. And so that I think is what is scary, is the legitimacy that we have attached to these ideas, or that white supremacists have attached to their ideas as being rational, so that when people come against them, even the idea of wearing a mask has become politicized.
Right.
How does that happen?
Yeah, it's almost impossible to believe, that the pandemic and the corona, which is a scam, according to to the far right, has become a political statement that and there's, and honestly, Governor Baker, I think, and Mayor Walsh have done a good job. I mean, I don't go anywhere where I don't see people wearing masks. I go to my sister's in Chicago, or where she is right over the border in Indiana. I mean, they're fighting it. I mean, people are fighting wearing masks. And like it's all like they're cowering down to to the left. I mean, it's just it's a bizarre time. And I call it a bizarre time because so much good has come out of it, but also so much evil has come out of it. And now it's all kind of coming to a head with this next election.
I think we need to be clear about something regarding the coronavirus. I was moderated a panel this week of epidemiologists from around the world. And one of the unifying aspects of this discussion was that the acknowledgement that is largely unacknowledged, even in our media, that there's an assumption that because this is largely affecting people of color disproportionately, that it is somehow acceptable. And that acceptability stems from eugenic assumptions. You actually hear people talking about the survival of the fittest. This is like an old Malthusian notion that if you basically contract COVID-19, that's somehow acceptable because, hey, it's happening to those people. It's not happening to us. And this is part of the political landscape that we're in right now, where folks are basically willing. You hear folks talking about a nation, but they're not thinking as a nation. They're thinking as Trump supporters, as siloed individuals, basically as individualists who basically are not thinking about the aggregate, about the nation. And I think that's why what's happening on the streets is not just about George Floyd, and it's not just about police brutality and systemic and structural racism. It's about humanity and the way people treat each other through these systems, and the acceptance of a $3 trillion tax cut, while at the same time unwilling to extend $600 a week to folks who require extension of unemployment. So the very point that you just raised, Chris, the class issues, are intertwined with the racial dynamics, and the racial dynamics are part of our failure to deal with this raging virus, for example. It's just one example of the type of things that need repair. And I think a lot of this, again, will take place on the streets. A lot of it will be led by young people, like that 12-year-old who spoke at John Lewis's
Sure.
Funeral, like people like Denise and like her son, Kelly Carter on campus, and another generation, Tony and mine. Basically, everyone has to work together to basically change these structures.
Denise, since you're the mother of a young child, a 4-year-old boy, and you were the youngest on the panel, I'll give you the last word, and you're probably the most connected to social media. What needs to be done on the social media forefront as far as getting out the word and calling out people to do the right thing here?
Social media is so different now. It's so different. It's a whole world of its own almost. I definitely want to say is young people have a lot of raw courage in a sense, and they're starting to put that raw courage out onto these social media platforms. They're being them whole selves and saying what it is that they have to say. And you can't stop them from saying what they have to say. You can delete a post or suspend it or report it, and it'll still come back up the next day. And that's the mentality that we have to keep going and just definitely keep staying around. It's great for organizing groups, but it's also really good for pulling people together. People you might not even expect to come together are coming together through Instagram, Facebook, whatever the case may be, Twitter. But we're figuring it out, and we have to keep doing it. We can't let the things that are we can't let anything hold us back. Essentially, we can't. It's not the time anymore. More than ever, like people were saying earlier, we have to push the envelope. We're making lots of progress. 2020 has been one heck of a year, but it really is the year of clear vision. We're seeing what we need to see, whether we want to see it or not. And now that it's in our faces, the question is, what are we going to do with it? So we have to continue to do it all. We have to continue to come together. We have to be able to pass resources, and that's what I really love about social media. But we also have to, I got a free couch off of social media. Someone was just have it. We have to do that for each other. There has to be more of that for each other. You know what I mean? And I just think, yeah, we can come together.
Well, I think you said it best. For better or for worse, 2020, it has been one heck of a year. My thanks to all my guests, Denise, Kelly, Tony, and Philip. Just a great show. I can't think of a better way to have spent a Friday evening. That's going to do it for this edition of Basic Black. We'll see you here real soon.